The modern world loves the idea that it's connected. Satellites orbit the Earth, underwater cables cross oceans, planes streak across the sky every minute. But there's a small piece of land where this network simply doesn't enter. Not due to technological failure, but by human choice. In the middle of the Indian Ocean, far from commercial routes and tourist destinations, lies North Sentinel Island. Part of India's Andaman and Nicobar archipelago, it looks, from above, like just another tropical island. Dense forest, clear beaches, coral reefs protecting the coast. With approximately 60 square kilometers, roughly the size of Manhattan, this small island is a territory that remains, in the full 21st century, completely outside the control and knowledge of modern civilization. But what makes this place unique isn't the landscape. It's the fact that one of the most isolated peoples on the planet lives there, the Sentinelese. They are possibly direct descendants of some of the first humans who migrated to Asia tens of thousands of years ago. Genetic studies of other Andamanese tribes suggest that these peoples may have separated from other African populations about 50 to 60,000 years ago, making them genetically distinct from practically any other living human group today. While empires rose and fell, while continents were explored and conquered, while the Industrial Revolution transformed the world, the Sentinelese continued living as hunter-gatherers, practically untouched. The most impressive thing is that this isolation isn't an accident. It's active resistance. Since the first external records, the Sentinelese have made it clear they don't want contact. They defend their island with bows, arrows, and spears. Strangers are seen as an immediate threat. There are no gestures of welcome, no attempts at dialogue, just a direct warning, go back. And this makes complete sense when we look at the history of other isolated peoples. During the 19th century, the British colonized the Andaman Islands. In the name of science, explorers tried to study the local inhabitants. Colonial officer Maurice Vidal Portman was particularly infamous. In 1880, he led an expedition to North Sentinel Island, managed to capture 6 inhabitants, an elderly couple and 4 children, and took them to Port Blair, the administrative capital. The result was predictable and tragic. The elderly couple died within days, probably from respiratory diseases. Horrified by what they had done, the British returned the children to the island with some gifts, hoping to establish friendly relations. But these children were probably already sick too. We don't know if they survived, but this event may have been the turning point in the Sentinelese attitude. Peoples from neighboring islands were captured and taken to colonial settlements. Many died quickly because of diseases common to Europeans, but fatal to those who had never had contact with these viruses. Flu, measles, smallpox, invisible diseases that killed far more than weapons. The Sentinelese probably observed this, or inherited the collective memory of violent encounters, and decided that the only way to survive was to prevent any approach. Today, this decision is supported by the Indian government. North Sentinel Island is a forbidden zone. Approaching it is illegal, not out of romantic respect, but as a practical matter of biological survival. An exclusion zone of 5 kilometers around the island has been established. Anyone who violates this zone can be arrested and face up to 3 years in prison. The Sentinelese have no immunity to modern diseases. A simple cold brought by a visitor could spread quickly and decimate the entire population, and we don't even know how many of them there are. Estimates vary between 50 and 150 people. There's no census, no record, only sporadic observations from a distance. This means that any epidemic could wipe out a huge part of the tribe in a matter of days. A fascinating anthropological curiosity, the Sentinelese don't appear to use fire for cooking. Observations from a distance have never detected smoke or flames on the island during the day. This raises intriguing questions. Do they eat everything raw? Did they lose fire technology at some point in their history? Or do they simply make fires so small and efficient that they don't produce visible smoke? This is one of many questions that will probably never be answered. Even so, throughout the 20th century, there were some controlled contact attempts. Between 1967 and 1991, Indian anthropologist T.N. Pandit led several expeditions to the island with the goal of establishing peaceful contact. Indian teams left coconuts on the beach, metal utensils, small gifts. Sometimes the Sentinelese took the objects. Other times they shot arrows. In a memorable 1991 expedition, something unusual happened. For the first and only recorded time, some Sentinelese, mainly women and children, approached the boat and accepted coconuts directly from the anthropologist's hands. It was a brief moment of curiosity, but when the team returned weeks later, they were met with arrows. The window had closed. Pandit described the Sentinelese as people with very dark skin, robust physical structure, and short stature, generally not exceeding 1.65 meters. He noted that they seemed healthy and well-nourished, suggesting that their way of life was sustainable and adapted to the island environment. On some occasions, young people seemed more curious. On others, adults showed clear hostility, but there was never a conversation, never an agreement, always distance. One of the greatest curiosities about them is the technology they use. They don't practice known agriculture. They live by hunting, fishing, and gathering. They make narrow canoes, but not for the open sea, only for shallow waters within the reef. This suggests that their life is deeply connected to the coastal ecosystem. They fish in lagoons, hunt forest animals, collect fruits and honey. Observations indicate that they hunt wild boar, sea turtles, fish, mollusks, and monitor lizards. They collect wild honey, fruits, roots, and tubers. Their diet is diverse and rich in proteins and essential nutrients. The canoes they build are peculiar, extremely narrow and without lateral stabilizers, which makes them unsuitable for navigating beyond the coral reef that protects the island. This means the Sentinelese are literally trapped on their island. They don't have the technology to navigate open waters. Metal tools seen with them probably come from ship wreckage that runs aground on the reefs. They repurpose the metal, shaping arrowheads and blades. Observers have reported seeing arrows with carefully crafted metal tips, suggesting they have basic metallurgy techniques, or at least cold molding. In other words, even isolated, they observe and adapt what the sea brings. In 1981, a Wasikate's cargo ship called Primrose ran aground on the island's reef. The crew became stranded and immediately saw groups of Sentinelese gathering on the beach, armed and hostile. The crew called by radio for urgent help, specifying that they needed weapons to defend themselves. Fortunately, the sea was rough enough to prevent the Sentinelese from reaching the ship. Days later, the crew was rescued by helicopter. The ship is still there, rusting on the reef, and probably served as a source of metal for the tribe for decades. The mystery of the lost language. Another curious detail, it's not known what language they speak. Attempts to compare words shouted by other Andamanese tribes yielded no results. The Sentinelese language may be completely unique, isolated from any other in the world. Linguists believe that if the language has truly been isolated for tens of thousands of years, it may have preserved phonetic and structural characteristics that have disappeared from all other human languages. This means that if this people disappears, an entire human language disappears with them, without ever being recorded. More than that, a unique window to understand how ancestral languages may have functioned would disappear, what linguistic patterns may have existed before the great human migrations. In 2004, the entire world turned its eyes to the Indian Ocean because of one of the largest tsunamis ever recorded. Giant waves hit dozens of countries. Hundreds of thousands of people died. The immediate question was, what about the Sentinelese? Indian Coast Guard helicopters flew over the island days later. The scene they recorded is almost symbolic. A man on the beach, painted, holding a bow. He points to the sky and shoots an arrow at the helicopter. That image went around the world. It wasn't just a gesture of hostility. It was a clear sign that they had survived the tsunami and that they didn't want help. This raised a fascinating question. How did they manage to survive a catastrophe that killed hundreds of thousands? Probably because they know the island intimately. Changes in the sea, animal behavior, sudden water recession, signs that many traditional coastal peoples know how to interpret. They may have run to higher areas of the forest before the waves arrived. Environmental knowledge transmitted through generations may have been the difference between life and death. Anthropologists speculate that the Sentinelese may have oral narratives about previous tsunamis, possibly transmitted for hundreds or even thousands of years. This type of cultural memory saved lives in other indigenous communities during the same tsunami. The Moken, another island people of Southeast Asia, also survived with almost no losses because their traditional stories spoke of waves that devour people and taught them to run to high ground when the sea recedes. But the episode that most put the Sentinelese in the headlines happened in 2018. John Allen Chow, a 26-year-old American missionary, decided it was his mission to convert the Sentinelese to Christianity. He He knew the island was forbidden. He knew the tribe rejected contact. He knew the biological and cultural risks. Still, he paid local fishermen to take him clandestinely near the island. Over the following days, he tried to approach several times in a small canoe. In notes found later, he described the tension, the fear, but also the conviction that he was doing something divine. In one of his first attempts, an arrow hit the Bible he was carrying. He interpreted this as a sign of divine protection and insisted. On the last attempt, fishermen reported seeing tribe members dragging his body on the beach after he was hit by arrows. The body was never recovered, and the Indian government decided not to search, precisely to avoid more contact. The case generated worldwide debate. Some called him a martyr. Others called him irresponsible. But most anthropologists and specialists were direct. He put not only his own life at risk, but the survival of the entire tribe. A single virus brought by him could have caused an invisible tragedy. This event reinforced the no-contact policy. In a way, the Sentinelese continue saying the same thing for centuries. And the world is gradually learning to listen. An intriguing philosophical question. What do the Sentinelese think about the outside world? They see planes crossing the sky. They see ships on the horizon. Helicopters occasionally fly over. Technological wreckage appears on their beaches. They know there's a world beyond their island. But how do they interpret it? Perhaps they see us as dangerous gods, perhaps as demons, or perhaps simply as threatening strangers from whom it's best to keep distance. We have no way of knowing. But one thing is certain. They've developed a consistent and effective response to any intrusion attempt. Another intriguing curiosity, how do the Sentinelese see themselves? Do they have a name? For themselves? Do they have myths about the origin of their island? Do they have stories about the world beyond the sea? Do they have religious rituals, art, music? All of this exists, certainly, but remains completely unknown. Perhaps the greatest curiosity about them is this. The Sentinelese are our contemporaries. They live in the same year, on the same planet, under the same satellites. But they chose a parallel reality, where the rhythm is that of the forest, where technology is that of bow and arrow, where survival depends on ecological knowledge and social cohesion, not on global infrastructure. They remind us that human history is not a straight line toward modernity. There are multiple ways of living, and some of them simply don't want to be transformed. From a scientific point of view, the Sentinelese represent a unique and irretrievable opportunity to study how early humans may have lived. But this opportunity comes with a moral price that most scientists consider too high, the risk of destroying exactly what they want to study. The Sentinelese also force us to confront an uncomfortable truth about progress. It's not always desired. Our globalized civilization assumes that more connection, more technology, more integration are always better. But they silently disagree with arrows. The greatest challenge for the Sentinelese may not come from human invaders, but from climate change. With rising sea levels, part of their island may be flooded. More intense storms could devastate their natural resources. Changes in fishing patterns could affect their food supply, and they have no way to migrate. They're trapped on their small island. Ironically, the civilization they reject may be creating the conditions that will threaten their survival, and there's nothing they can do about it, because they have no voice in the global forums where these issues are debated. Some anthropologists fear that in a few decades, the Sentinelese may face an impossible choice: accept contact and external help, or perish along with their island. It would be a tragedy of unimaginable proportions, the end of a human lineage that survived for 60,000 years, defeated not by invaders, but by climate altered by a distant civilization. In the end, North Sentinel Island is not just an isolated place. It's an ethical frontier, a limit that forces us to ask, how far does our curiosity go? At what point does exploring become invading? And is it that respecting sometimes means turning our backs and letting a people continue existing without being observed? The Sentinelese left no books, left no monuments, left no digital records. Still, their existence is one of the most powerful statements in the modern world. They're still there. And they keep saying no. This small island of 60 square kilometers, lost in the Indian Ocean, reminds us that not everything needs to be known, documented, explained, or integrated. That some borders should remain intact. That some questions should go unanswered. The Sentinelese are living proof that in a world of almost 8 billion hyper-connected people, it's still possible to choose solitude. and that this choice, however incomprehensible it may seem to us, deserves to be respected.